What if the man driving your Uber wasn't just any driver, but a billionaire hiding his true identity to search for something money can't buy? In a world of secrets and deception, Colton Street James trades his penthouse for a battered car and steps into a life of struggle, only to find himself falling for Maya Collins, a woman with dreams bigger than her reality. But what happens when his lies are exposed? Can love survive betrayal, or will their worlds be torn apart forever? Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The chandelier sparkled above the sea of Seattle's elite, casting golden light over tuxedos and sequin gowns. Colton Street James stood near the edge of the grand ballroom, holding a glass of champagne he hadn't sipped. His sharp navy suit was tailored to perfection, his presence magnetic, and yet he felt like a ghost among the crowd. He scanned the room, his practiced smile fixed, while a symphony played softly in the background. "Look at him," a woman's voice carried through the chatter. "Colton Street James, the golden boy of tech. Handsome, rich, but I bet he's as hollow as the rest of them." Her friend laughed. "Exactly. Guys like him only care about their money and their image. Imagine being surrounded by everything money can buy, but no one who actually cares about you." Colton's hand tightened around the stem of his glass. He didn't turn to face them, but their words sliced through him like shards of ice. His smile faltered. The irony was bitter. Their careless judgment hit closer to the truth than he cared to admit. For years, Colton had played the part of the charming billionaire, the genius who revolutionized urban tech with his rideshare empire. He had everything society deemed important: wealth, influence, admiration. But their words stirred a gnawing insecurity that had lingered in him for as long as he could remember. A few hours later, the gala was winding down. Colton excused himself early, citing a meeting that didn't exist. He stepped into the cool night air, letting the breeze cut through the suffocating weight of the evening. As his driver pulled the sleek, black town car around, Colton paused. "Not yet," he muttered, waving the car off. Instead of heading home to his glass penthouse overlooking the city, Colton walked. His polished shoes clacked against the pavement as he made his way toward a quieter part of town. It was here that he spotted a familiar figure seated on a bench beneath a flickering street lamp. "Ethan?" Colton asked, startled. His voice cut through the quiet hum of the street lamp above. Ethan looked up, his face etched with exhaustion and a shadow of defeat. He blinked a few times as if unsure he was seeing correctly, before managing a faint smile. "Colton, fancy seeing you here. What are you doing out this late?" Colton asked, lowering himself onto the bench beside him. Ethan let out a dry chuckle, the sound tinged with bitterness. "Oh, just having a little existential crisis in public." "You?" Colton glanced around, as if trying to absorb the quiet stillness of the neighborhood. "Needed a walk. Clear my head. But you? What's going on?" For a moment, Ethan didn't answer. He stared at the ground, his fingers fidgeting with a crumpled piece of paper in his lap. Finally, he held it up, the edges soft and worn from being folded and unfolded too many times. "I applied for a teaching position at Windridge Academy," he admitted. His voice was low, heavy with disappointment. "Had everything they asked for. Perfect qualifications, glowing recommendations, years of experience. But apparently I don't fit the school's image." Colton frowned. "Windridge? That's the private school, right? The one all the CEOs and tech execs send their kids to?" "Yeah," Ethan said, shaking his head. "The same one." "That's ridiculous," Colton said firmly, his brows knitting together. "You're one of the best teachers I know. I remember how you tutored half our dorm back in college, and they're running companies now because of you." Ethan let out a hollow laugh. "Thanks, man. But apparently being good at what I do isn't enough. They wanted someone shinier. Someone who could look the part, charm the parents at fundraisers, and fit into their picture-perfect image." Colton stared at him, his jaw tightening. "So it's not about the kids? It's about keeping up appearances." Ethan leaned back against the bench, staring at the flickering streetlight. "That's the world we live in, isn't it? People like me don't get the breaks. Doesn't matter how much heart you have or how hard you work. If you don't look the part, you're out. There was a long silence between them, filled only by the occasional sound of a car passing in the distance. Colton turned the words over in his mind, each one sinking deeper. It shouldn't be like that, Colton said finally, his voice quiet but resolute. You deserve better than this, Ethan. Kids deserve teachers who care, who are passionate, like you. Ethan let out a weary sigh. Thanks, Colton. But the system doesn't work for guys like me. It works for guys like you. He glanced sideways at Colton, his smile faint but without malice. No offense. Colton hesitated, guilt twisting in his chest. None taken, he said softly. Ethan rubbed his eyes, his exhaustion evident. You know, I used to think hard work and talent would be enough, but every door I knock on seems to open for someone with more polish, more connections, less heart. He chuckled bitterly. Guess I was wrong. Colton didn't know what to say. For all his wealth, for all his influence, he couldn't fix this. Not with money, not with a recommendation. Ethan's pain wasn't just personal. It was systemic, a flaw embedded in the very world Colton had thrived in. When Colton finally returned to his penthouse that night, the glittering cityscape stretched before him, he felt an unfamiliar heaviness. He had built a world of convenience and perfection, but at what cost? He was a man who could buy anything, except connection, except authenticity. The idea came suddenly, sharp and clear. Colton walked to his desk, pulling out a blank notebook. At the top of the page, he wrote a single question. What would it feel like to live an ordinary life? Flipping to the next page, he started drafting his plan. For the first time in years, he felt alive, not from a new investment or a gala invite, but from the possibility of stepping away from it all. His rideshare company had been his first success, a service connecting drivers and riders in an efficient, seamless network. He would use it now for something far more personal. He would become Cody, a name borrowed from his childhood dog. He would trade his tailored suits for thrift store clothes, sell his luxury cars for something ordinary, and move to a modest neighborhood. For the first time in years, he would experience life without the lens of wealth distorting it. And maybe, just maybe, he'd discover what he was missing. The city lights flickered in the reflection of the penthouse windows as Colton finalized the details. The voice of doubt whispered in the back of his mind. This is ridiculous. What do you think you'll find out there? He pushed the thought aside. He wasn't sure what he'd find, but he was certain of what he wouldn't. Another hollow night like tonight. The morning was colder than Colton expected. He stood in front of a dingy studio apartment in the heart of a working-class neighborhood. The building had peeling paint, cracked steps, and an unmistakable smell of dampness lingering in the air. His designer luggage looked comically out of place on the cracked pavement. Inside, the space was sparse. A faded beige couch sat against one wall, and a second-hand coffee table bore the scars of countless drink rings. The kitchenette was cramped, with a refrigerator that hummed loudly enough to drown out his thoughts. Colton set his duffel bag down and glanced around. This was home for now. He sighed, pulling out his phone. With a few taps, he logged into Uber, the rideshare app he had built years ago. The app now identified him as Cody Miller, a brand new driver. His profile picture showed a grainy, intentionally plain image of himself, carefully edited to dull his polished features. His bio read simply, "Your ride, your way." He'd also traded his sleek sports car for a battered old sedan he'd bought off a classified ad. It smelled faintly of stale coffee and gym socks, and its upholstery was patched with duct tape. Colton slid into the driver's seat, gripping the worn steering wheel. The reality of what he was about to do sank in. "This is insane," he muttered, starting the car. The engine sputtered twice before roaring reluctantly to life. But here we go. His first ride request came within minutes, a man named Trevor needing a lift to a nearby office park. Colton followed the GPS directions nervously, his hands gripping the wheel as if his life depended on it. When he arrived, Trevor, a frazzled man in his 30s, threw himself into the back seat without so much as a glance at Colton. "Man, traffic better not make me late," Trevor muttered, tapping furiously on his phone. You drivers really need to learn shortcuts. Colton bit back a retort. Remember why you're doing this, he reminded himself. But by the time he dropped Trevor off, Colton was already questioning the brilliance of his plan. He'd built Uber to improve urban mobility, and now he was experiencing firsthand how thankless the work could be. As the day went on, Colton's passengers became a blur. There was the college student who argued over the fare, the elderly woman who insisted on giving him turn-by-turn directions despite his GPS, the teenager who spent the entire ride blasting music through her headphones. By evening, Colton was exhausted and questioning his sanity. Just as he considered calling it a day, another request came in. The pickup location was a diner on the other side of town. Colton debated ignoring it, but decided to accept. One more ride, he told himself. Then I'm done. He pulled up to the diner, its neon sign buzzing faintly against the night sky. A woman stepped out, her figure silhouetted against the light. She was holding a to-go bag in one hand, a tired expression on her face. Her other hand pushed the door open as she slid into the passenger seat. "Hi," she said, offering a polite but weary smile. "Thanks for picking me up." "No problem," Colton replied, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. Something about her struck him immediately. She wasn't like his other passengers. There was a quiet strength in her voice, a resilience that piqued his curiosity. As they drove, she adjusted the to-go bag on her lap and asked, "So, how long have you been driving?" "Not long," Colton admitted, hesitating. "Just started, actually." She nodded. "It's, decent money, right? If you're willing to put in the hours?" "I guess I'll find out," he replied, trying to keep his tone light. "What about you?" "Long day." The woman laughed softly, though it sounded more tired than amused. "Always. Between my jobs and taking care of my brother, it feels like there aren't enough hours in the day." "Your brother?" Colton asked, glancing at her again. "Dylan," she said, her tone softening. "He's 15, has cerebral palsy. Smartest kid you'll ever meet. But it's a full-time job making sure he gets what he needs." She paused, then added, "And I'm Maya, by the way. Should have mentioned that before spilling my life story." "Cody," Colton said, using his new alias. "Nice to meet you." Her lips curved into a small smile. "You too, Cody." The ride was quiet after that, but not uncomfortably so. When they reached her destination, a modest apartment building, Maya turned to him before getting out. "Thanks for the ride," she said, her voice sincere. "And good luck with the driving thing. You seem like the kind of person who notices things. That'll come in handy." Colton watched as she walked inside, her to-go bag swinging at her side. He didn't know why, but her words lingered with him. She hadn't treated him like an invisible service worker or dismissed him like so many others had that day. Instead, she'd seen him, really seen him, even if she didn't know who he was. As he drove back to his apartment, Colton's thoughts were consumed by Maya Collins. There was something about her, a spark, a depth, that he couldn't ignore. For the first time since starting this experiment, Colton felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would be worth it. The next morning, Colton woke to the persistent hum of his refrigerator and the faint aroma of coffee from his neighbor's apartment. It was a far cry from the quiet elegance of his penthouse mornings, where the aroma of freshly brewed espresso filled the air, delivered by a chef before his day began. But here, in this worn studio with its squeaky floorboards and mismatched furniture, life felt different, more raw. As he scrolled through the app, Colton noticed a familiar name, Maya Collins. His heart skipped slightly. She'd requested a ride to a nearby community center. He hesitated for a moment before accepting, curiosity tugging at him. There was something about her, a quiet resilience, a warmth, that lingered in his thoughts since their first meeting. When he pulled up outside her building, she was already waiting, juggling a tote bag filled with art supplies and what looked like paperwork. She climbed into the passenger seat, her face lighting up with recognition. "Cody," she greeted, adjusting the bag on her lap. "Guess I'm officially a repeat customer." Colton chuckled softly. "Glad to have you back. Busy day ahead?" "Always," Maya replied, glancing at him. "Heading to the community center for the kids' art class. It's my favorite part of the week." He glanced at her bag, curiosity piqued. "You're an artist?" "Not professionally," Maya said, a hint of pride in her voice. but art's always been my passion. I'm trying to open a center where kids can explore their creativity, especially the ones who don't have much else. That's an incredible dream, Colton said sincerely. What's stopping you? Maya sighed, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. Money mostly. It's hard to convince people to invest in something they can't see an immediate profit from. Plus, taking care of Dylan doesn't leave much room for anything else. Colton nodded, filing away the details. Dylan seems lucky to have you. He's the best kid, Maya said, her voice softening. Smart, funny, and tougher than anyone I know. But it's a lot sometimes, balancing everything. For the first time in years, Colton found himself genuinely listening, not out of politeness or expectation, but because he wanted to. Maya's words carried weight, her struggles tangible in a way his privileged life rarely encountered. It was humbling. As they approached the community center, Maya's demeanor shifted, her posture straightening and her expression brightening. She reached for the door handle before pausing. Hey, thanks for listening, she said, offering a small smile. Most people just nod and move on. Anytime, Colton replied, meaning it. Maya stepped out, her bag slung over her shoulder, and disappeared into the center. Colton sat there for a moment, watching through the window as children ran up to greet her, their faces lighting up as she laughed and handed out supplies. She wasn't just kind, she was a force of nature. The next few days were a whirlwind of passengers and routes, but thoughts of Maya lingered in Colton's mind. He couldn't shake the image of her surrounded by kids, her laughter carrying through the air like music. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met, and the connection he felt, however fleeting, was something he couldn't ignore. A week later, their paths crossed again. This time, Maya was heading to her second job, a late-night shift at a diner. Colton offered to wait and drive her home afterward, a gesture she initially refused, but eventually accepted with a tired laugh. You're persistent, she said, as they pulled up outside the diner. Maybe I just don't want to say goodbye yet, Colton replied, surprising himself with his honesty. That night, as he waited for her shift to end, Colton thought about the walls he was building and the ones he was breaking. Every time he saw Maya, he felt a growing guilt about the lie of his identity. Yet he couldn't bring himself to tell her. Not yet. When Maya finally emerged, her exhaustion was evident. She slid into the car, offering a grateful smile. Long day, Colton asked, pulling into traffic. You could say that, she replied, leaning her head against the window. Sometimes I feel like I'm running on fumes. Well, Colton said after a moment, fumes seem to be carrying you pretty far. Maya laughed softly, the sound warming the air between them. You're not bad at this, you know. At what? Colton asked, glancing at her. Being genuine, Maya replied. Most people just talk to fill the silence, but you actually listen. It's rare. Colton didn't respond immediately. How could he when her words both comforted and condemned him? She thought he was genuine, but his entire presence in her life was built on a lie. The weight of that realization pressed down on him, but for now he let it pass. As they reached her apartment, Maya hesitated before getting out. Hey, she said, turning to him. You're a good guy, Cody. Don't lose that. Colton watched her disappear inside, her words echoing in his mind. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. Maya wasn't just another passenger in his experiment. She was becoming something far more important. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the community center as Colton pulled up to drop Maya off. The building was alive with the sound of children's laughter and the buzz of activity. Colton watched as Maya stepped out of the car, her tote bag swinging at her side. Thanks again, Cody, she said, giving him that warm smile that had become so familiar. See you around? Count on it, Colton replied, feeling the faint tug of guilt that had been gnawing at him since they first met. He waited until she disappeared inside before pulling away, his mind lingering on her. Later that week, Colton received another ride request from Maya. This time she was heading to a downtown cafe for a meeting. She climbed into the car, her expression slightly more reserved than usual. Everything okay? Colton asked as they merged into traffic. Yeah, Maya replied, though her tone didn't convince him. I'm meeting someone about potential funding for the Arts Center. That's great, Colton said, genuinely happy for her. Who's the lucky donor? Maya hesitated, then sighed. Dylan Carr. The name hit Colton like a jolt. He glanced at her through the rearview mirror. An ex? She nodded, a wry smile tugging at her lips. Yeah, he's complicated. Let's just say he wasn't exactly supportive of my dreams when we were together. But now he's offering to help fund the center. Colton's grip tightened on the wheel. He didn't know much about Dylan, but he could already tell this wasn't a simple act of generosity. At the cafe, Colton parked discreetly nearby, unable to resist the urge to keep an eye on the meeting. Through the large windows, he saw Maya seated across from a tall man in a tailored suit. Dylan was every bit the picture of confidence. Charming smile, relaxed posture, and an air of entitlement that set Colton's teeth on edge. The conversation seemed cordial at first, but Colton noticed Maya's expression shift as Dylan leaned in, his gestures becoming more animated. Maya's smile faded, replaced by a furrowed brow. Colton couldn't hear their words, but he could sense the tension building. When the meeting ended, Maya stepped outside, her shoulders slightly slumped. Colton watched as Dylan followed, placing a hand on her arm. Maya pulled away, shaking her head before walking briskly toward the car. She slid into the passenger seat, letting out a frustrated sigh. Well, that was something. Didn't go well? Colton asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. Maya shook her head. Dylan wants to help, but there are strings attached. What kind of strings? She hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her bag. He wants a say in how the center is run. The programs, the staff, even the name. He says it's just business, but it feels like he's trying to take over. Colton felt a surge of protectiveness rise within him. And what did you say? I told him I'd think about it, Maya admitted, her voice tinged with guilt. I hate the idea of giving him control, but we're desperate for funding. I don't know if I can do this on my own. You can, Colton said firmly. Don't let him make you think otherwise. She looked at him, her eyes searching his. You really believe that? Absolutely, Colton said, his voice steady. You've built something amazing, Maya. Don't let someone like Dylan take that away from you. Her lips curved into a small, grateful smile. Thanks, Cody. I needed to hear that. As the days passed, Colton found himself increasingly preoccupied with Maya's dilemma. He couldn't shake the image of Dylan's smug expression or the way Maya had looked so conflicted after their meeting. It wasn't his place to interfere, but he couldn't just stand by either. One evening, while waiting to pick up Maya from the community center, Colton saw Dylan again. He was standing near the entrance, talking to one of the parents. Colton watched as Dylan handed the parent a sleek business card, his demeanor oozing charm. It was clear Dylan was positioning himself as a benefactor, but Colton couldn't help but feel there was something calculated about his approach. When Maya finally emerged, she looked surprised to see Dylan still there. He greeted her with that same practiced smile, but Colton could see the subtle tension in her posture. Cody, Maya said as she climbed into the car, her tone lighter than he expected. Let's go. As they drove away, Colton couldn't resist asking, what's he doing here? Trying to prove he's serious, Maya replied, her frustration evident. He's making donations, volunteering his time. It's like he's trying to win everyone over. And is it working? Colton asked, glancing at her. Maya sighed. Some of the parents love him. They see the money and think he's the answer to all our problems. But I don't know. Something about it feels off. Colton nodded, his suspicions about Dylan deepening. Trust your instincts, he said. They're usually right. Maya didn't respond immediately, but the gratitude in her eyes spoke volumes. As the evening wore on, Colton couldn't shake the feeling that Dylan was more than just a nuisance. He was a threat to Maya's dream and, potentially, to her heart. Colton didn't know how far Dylan was willing to go, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let Maya face him alone. The sound of children playing echoed faintly as Colton pulled his car to the curb outside Maya's apartment. The day had been an endless blur of passengers, but knowing he was ending it with Maya gave him an unexpected surge of energy. When she appeared at the front door, a frazzled look on her face, Colton immediately noticed the absence of her usual tote bag. Instead, she carried her car keys in one hand, jangling them absently as she approached. Cody, she said with a sheepish smile as she climbed into the passenger seat. I hate to ask this, but can you drive me to the mechanic? My car decided to call it quits today. Of course, Colton said without hesitation, pulling away from the curb. Rough day? You have no idea, Maya muttered, slumping against the seat. Between work, Dylan's therapy sessions, and now this. It's like the universe is testing my patience. You're handling it pretty well, Colton remarked, glancing at her with a faint smile. She huffed a laugh. You should have seen me earlier, talking to the car like it could understand me. Spoiler alert, it didn't start. Colton chuckled, appreciating her humor, even in frustration. As they drove, the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease, and by the time they reached the mechanic, she was back to her usual self. When the mechanic delivered the verdict, a repair cost that made Maya wince, Colton felt a surge of protectiveness. Why don't I stick around, he offered as they walked back to his car. You're probably not in the mood to deal with this alone. Maya hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Thanks, Cody. I could use the company. They spent the afternoon running errands, their conversation flowing easily. At one point, they stopped at a park, Maya insisting on grabbing ice cream from a food truck parked near the entrance. Colton watched as she handed him a cone with a mischievous smile. Considerate payment for being my unofficial chauffeur, she teased. Best payment I've ever gotten, Colton replied, savoring the rare lightness of the moment. As they wandered through the park, they stumbled upon a group of children sitting in a circle, painting on large sheets of paper. A woman approached Maya, greeting her warmly. Maya, I didn't expect to see you here. Hi, Mrs. Torres, Maya said, her expression brightening. What's the occasion? We're doing a community art day, Mrs. Torres explained. The kids love it, but we could always use an extra pair of hands. Before Maya could answer, Colton stepped forward. We'd be happy to help. Maya shot him a look but didn't protest as they joined the group. For the next hour, Colton watched as Maya came alive, guiding the children with a patience and enthusiasm that left him in awe. She showed them how to mix colors, encouraged their creativity, and laughed at their jokes like she belonged in their world. One boy, hesitant and shy, struggled with his painting. Colton crouched beside him, offering quiet encouragement. You're doing great, he said, pointing to the boy's colorful brushstrokes. What are you painting? The boy hesitated before replying softly, a dragon. That's one awesome dragon, Colton said, and the boy's face lit up with pride. When the session ended, the children gathered their paintings and left, each one waving enthusiastically at Maya. She waved back, her smile radiant. You're really good with them, Colton said as they walked back to the car. Kids are easy, Maya replied, her tone wistful. They don't care about status or money. They just want someone to see them, to listen. Colton felt her words strike a chord. He knew that feeling all too well, wanting to be seen for who you really are. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, they arrived back at Maya's apartment. Colton turned to her as she unbuckled her seatbelt. Today was nice, he said, his voice softer than usual. Maya paused, meeting his gaze. It was, she admitted. Thanks for sticking around, Cody. You made a tough day a little easier. I'm glad I could help, he replied, his heart swelling at the warmth in her eyes. She hesitated for a moment, then leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. You're different, Cody, and I mean that in a good way. Before he could respond, she leaned in and kissed him. It was soft, tentative, but it sent a rush of electricity through him. When she pulled back, her cheeks flushed, she smiled shyly. Good night, Cody, she said, stepping out of the car. Colton watched her disappear into the building, his mind racing. The kiss was everything he hadn't expected and everything he hadn't dared to hope for. But as the excitement faded, the weight of his secret pressed down on him. For Maya, he was Cody, a simple Uber driver with a good heart. But he knew that the truth about who he really was could shatter everything they were beginning to build. And for the first time, Colton wasn't sure if he could keep up the charade. The kiss lingered in Colton's mind for days. Every moment replayed vividly. The softness of Maya's touch, the warmth in her eyes, and the way her voice trembled slightly when she said goodnight. But alongside that joy was a growing fear. The closer they became, the harder it would be to keep his true identity hidden. And the guilt, it was becoming unbearable. Colton spent the next few days driving passengers and avoiding his reflection in the rearview mirror. He told himself he was doing this for Maya, for her dream, for her faith in genuine connection. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was afraid of losing her. It wasn't long before that fear caught up to him. One crisp morning, Colton arrived at the community center to pick Maya up after one of her art sessions. He parked in his usual spot and waited, watching through the large windows as she finished packing up supplies. Just as she stepped outside, another car pulled up. A sleek black SUV, shiny and ostentatious in the way only someone like Dylan Carr could manage. Maya's expression tightened as Dylan stepped out, all confidence and charm. Colton watched as they exchanged words, Dylan gesturing animatedly. Maya looked uncomfortable, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Finally, she turned and walked toward Colton's car, leaving Dylan standing there. As she climbed into the passenger seat, Colton could feel the tension radiating off her. "Everything okay?" he asked carefully. Maya sighed, rubbing her temples. "Dylan just doesn't get it. He keeps pushing to help with the arts center, but it's clear he doesn't care about the kids or the community. It's all about control." Colton clenched the steering wheel, his jaw tightening. "You told him no, right?" "I tried," Maya said, her frustration evident. "But he doesn't listen. He thinks throwing money at problems solves everything." "Sounds familiar," Colton muttered under his breath. Maya glanced at him. "What do you mean?" Colton hesitated, realizing he'd said too much. "Just, some people think money gives them the right to dictate everything." Maya nodded, her expression softening. "Exactly. That's why I'm trying to do this on my own. I want the Arts Center to stand for something real, not just another vanity project." Her words hit Colton like a hammer. She didn't realize how deeply they applied to him, to the lie he'd been living. Before he could respond, Maya's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face paling. "Oh no." "What's wrong?" Colton asked. "It's Dylan," Maya said, holding up her phone. "He just posted something about investing in the community with a picture of him at the Arts Center. He's making it look like he's already involved." Colton's hands tightened on the wheel. "That's low, even for him." Maya slumped in her seat, looking defeated. "What am I supposed to do, Cody? He has the money, the connections. I'm just one person." "You're not just anything," Colton said firmly. "You're Maya, and you're stronger than he'll ever be." Maya smiled faintly at his words, but the stress was still clear in her eyes. Later that evening, as Colton sat in his apartment, he couldn't shake the image of Maya's face, her exhaustion, her frustration, and the quiet strength she carried even in the face of Dylan's manipulation. He knew he had to do something, but before he could figure out what, his phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but Colton answered anyway. "Colton Street." "James," a cold, smug voice greeted him. "Or should I call you Cody?" Colton froze. He didn't need to see the face to know who it was. "Dylan?" "That's right," Dylan said, his tone dripping with satisfaction. "You really thought you could fool her? That I wouldn't figure it out?" Colton's grip tightened on his phone. "What do you want, Dylan?" "Simple," Dylan replied. "Stay away from Maya. She deserves someone who's honest with her, not some billionaire playing dress up as a poor Uber driver." Colton's chest tightened, the words cutting deeper than he wanted to admit. But Dylan wasn't finished. "Of course," Dylan continued. "If you don't, I'll make sure she knows everything. And trust me, she won't be thanking you when she finds out who you really are." The call ended abruptly, leaving Colton staring at his phone. For a long moment he sat there, his mind racing. He knew Dylan was right about one thing. Maya deserved the truth, but how could he tell her now, after everything they'd shared? The next day, Colton found himself at the community center again. He watched from a distance as Maya helped a group of children with an art project, her laughter echoing in the crisp autumn air. She was so full of life, so real, and he felt like an imposter. Summoning his courage, Colton approached her as the kids ran off to play. She looked up, surprised but smiling. "Hey, Cody," she said. "What's up?" Colton opened his mouth, the words forming in his mind. But before he could speak, a familiar voice interrupted. "There he is!" Dylan's voice rang out, smug and triumphant. He strode toward them, his hands in his pockets, his smirk firmly in place. The man of the hour. Maya frowned, glancing between them. "What are you doing here, Dylan?" "I just thought it was time Maya knew the truth," Dylan said, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. He turned to Colton. "Unless you'd like to do the honors?" Colton felt his stomach drop. He could see the confusion on Maya's face, the cracks forming in her trust. "What's he talking about?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Colton took a deep breath, his heart pounding. "Maya, I need to tell you something." But Dylan didn't give him the chance. "He's not Cody, Maya. He's Colton Street. James, you know, the billionaire tech mogul? He's been lying to you this whole time." The silence that followed was deafening. Maya stared at Colton, her expression a mixture of shock and hurt. "Is that true?" she whispered. Colton nodded, his throat tight. "Yes. How could you?" Maya's voice broke, her hands trembling. "You lied to me, to Dylan, to the kids. Why?" "I wanted to know what it felt like to be seen for who I am," Colton said, his voice desperate. "Not for my money, not for my name, just me. And then I met you, and it wasn't supposed to happen like this." Maya shook her head, stepping back. "I can't do this. I don't even know who you are." "Maya, please," Colton started, but she cut him off. "Stay away from me," she said, her voice trembling, "and stay away from the Arts Center." As she walked away, Colton felt the weight of his choices crashing down on him. He had wanted to find something real, but now he had lost the one person who made him feel that way. And Dylan's smirk was the last thing he saw as the chapter closed on everything he thought he'd built. Chapter 7. Fallout. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the sleek expanse of Colton's penthouse. He stepped inside, the emptiness of the space echoing his own hollow feelings. The panoramic view of the Seattle skyline stretched before him, glittering with promise. But tonight it felt like nothing more than a backdrop to his regret. Colton sank onto the leather couch, his hands gripping the edges of his knees. Maya's voice replayed in his mind, trembling with hurt and betrayal. "How could you? I don't even know who you are." He had thought his plan would lead him to something real, something that money couldn't buy. But now he was left with nothing but the bitter taste of failure. Maya was gone, her trust shattered, and the Arts Center, the very thing she'd poured her heart into, was at risk of slipping into Dylan's grasp. Colton picked up his phone, scrolling absently through his contacts until he landed on Ethan, his college friend who had been his inspiration for this journey. After a moment of hesitation, he tapped the call button. "Colton," Ethan answered, his voice tinged with concern. "It's late. What's going on?" "I screwed up," Colton admitted, his voice raw. "I thought I don't know, escape the weight of who I am, but I ended up hurting someone who doesn't deserve it." Ethan was silent for a moment before responding. "You mean Maya?" "Yeah," Colton said, exhaling sharply. "She's everything I was looking for. Kind, real, passionate, and I destroyed it." Ethan's voice softened. "Colton, you've always been good at building things. Empires, companies, ideas. But relationships? They're not about control or strategy. They're about honesty and vulnerability. If you want to fix this, you've got to show her the real you." Colton nodded to himself, though Ethan couldn't see it. "Thanks," he said quietly. "I just hope it's not too late." Meanwhile, across town, Maya sat on the floor of her modest apartment, surrounded by sketches and financial documents. Her brother Dylan was asleep in the next room, but her thoughts refused to rest. She clutched a mug of cold tea, staring blankly at the papers detailing the Arts Center's budget. No matter how many times she crunched the numbers, the outcome was the same. Without outside funding, her dream would collapse. And now, thanks to Dylan Carr's manipulations, she was running out of time. The lease agreement for the building was suddenly at risk, a direct result of Dylan leveraging his influence to pressure the landlord. He had dangled his financial support like a lifeline, but Maya couldn't shake the unease his offers brought. Her best friend Lila arrived the next morning, her energy a much-needed balm to Maya's frayed nerves. "All right, spill." Lila said, flopping onto the couch. What's going on? You've been quieter than a library mouse. Maya hesitated before pouring out the entire story about Cody's betrayal, Dylan's offer, and the precarious future of the Arts Center. Lila listened intently, her brow furrowing. Look, I get why you're mad at Cody, Colton, whatever his name is, but it sounds like he genuinely cares about you. He lied to me, Maya said, her voice breaking. Everything we had, it was built on a lie. Lila placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Maybe it started that way, but people don't fake the kind of connection you two had. And as for Dylan, he's a snake in a suit. If you let him control the center, he'll turn it into something you don't even recognize. Maya bit her lip, torn between her frustration with Colton and her growing desperation to save her dream. Over the next few days, Colton wrestled with his own guilt while devising a plan to help Maya. He started small, anonymously donating supplies to the Arts Center and volunteering his time under the radar. He taught painting classes to the children, using skills he hadn't touched since his high school art elective. At first, the kids were hesitant around him, but his easygoing nature and genuine enthusiasm quickly won them over. Maya noticed the changes at the center, the influx of new supplies, the increased community engagement, but she didn't know Colton was behind it. She focused on keeping things afloat, though her thoughts often drifted to the man who had so thoroughly complicated her life. One evening, Maya arrived at the center to find a group of parents waiting for her. They praised the new programs, the improved facilities, and the impact the center was having on their children. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. But that hope was quickly overshadowed when she received an email from her landlord stating that Dylan Carr had made an aggressive offer to buy out the lease. Furious, Maya confronted Dylan at a cafe the next day, her footsteps brisk and determined as she approached his table. In her hand was a crumpled email printout, its edges bent from where she gripped. Maya noticed the changes at the center. The influx of new supplies, the increased community engagement, but she did it too tightly. Dylan was seated casually, dressed impeccably as always, a smug smile playing on his lips as he sipped his espresso. "What are you doing?" Maya demanded, slamming the email onto the table with enough force to rattle his saucer. Dylan raised an eyebrow, his demeanor infuriatingly calm. "Good morning to you too, Maya," he drawled, setting his cup down with deliberate ease. "To what do I owe this dramatic entrance?" "You know exactly why I'm here," Maya snapped, jabbing a finger at the email. "What is this? Why are you pressuring the landlord to sell the building? You're sabotaging everything we've worked." Maya noticed the changes at the center, the influx of new supplies, the increased community engagement, but Dylan leaned back in his chair, folding his arms as his lips curled into a practiced smirk. "Relax, Maya," he said smoothly. "I'm trying to secure the future of the center. Isn't that what you want?" Maya's jaw clenched, her eyes blazing with fury. "Secure the future? By forcing us out of our lease? By trying to buy out the building from under me? Don't you dare pretend this is about the kids or the community." Dylan shrugged, reaching for his cup again. "It is about the community," he said, his tone dripping with mock sincerity. "I have the resources to make this place something bigger, better, something sustainable." Maya leaned over the table, her voice trembling with restrained anger. "You're not trying to make anything better. This isn't about sustainability or the kids. It's about you controlling everything. You want to turn the center into your personal PR project, and you don't care who you hurt to do it." Dylan chuckled softly, the sound sending a chill down her spine. "Oh, Maya," he said, shaking his head as though addressing a child. "You're so passionate. It's admirable, really. But passion doesn't pay the bills. Business is business. If you're too naive to see that, then maybe you're not cut out for this." Maya's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Don't you dare patronize me, Dylan," she hissed. "You think this is just business? This center isn't some line item on a spreadsheet. It's a lifeline for these kids, for their families, for this community. They trust us to protect it, not sell it out to the highest bidder." Dylan's expression hardened, the condescension replaced with cold calculation. "And what happens when the donations dry up, Maya? When you can't keep the lights on?" Idealism is a nice concept, but it doesn't keep the doors open. You need someone like me, someone who knows how to play the game. I don't need you, Maya spat, her voice rising. And I don't need your games. I'd rather lose everything than let you turn this into a monument to your ego. Dylan's smirk returned, though there was a flicker of irritation in his eyes. He leaned forward, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous tone. You should think carefully about your next move, Maya, because whether you like it or not, I hold all the cards. And if you want to keep your little dream alive, you might want to consider playing nice. Maya straightened, her eyes narrowing. You don't hold the cards, Dylan. Not anymore. And I promise you, I won't let you ruin this. She turned on her heel and walked away, her heart pounding as a mix of anger and determination coursed through her. She felt trapped, caught between two men who had upended her life in very different ways. That night, Colton decided to stop avoiding the unease that had been gnawing at him. His intuition pushed him to visit the Skyline Room, one of his high-end restaurants in Seattle. It was a rare occurrence for him to show up unannounced, but something about the day felt off. As he passed the private dining rooms, a familiar voice caught his attention. Peering discreetly through the frosted glass, Colton spotted Dylan Carr seated with another man, their heads bowed in deep conversation. His instincts prickled. Dylan wasn't the type to meet here without an agenda. Colton flagged down a trusted server and leaned in close. Keep this quiet, he said, his voice low but firm. That man in the gray suit, Dylan Carr. Listen carefully to what he says and let me know if anything sounds unusual. The server hesitated for only a second before nodding. Got it, Mr. St. James. Colton took a seat at the bar, ordering a drink and keeping a casual eye on the private room. He could feel the tension building, though he wasn't sure why. Minutes later, the server returned, setting a folded napkin next to his drink. They're talking about real estate, she murmured, careful not to draw attention. Something about using a community grant for their own projects. It doesn't sound above board. Colton's pulse quickened. Did they mention specifics? Dylan said something about an arts center and leveraging it to secure permits for luxury condos, the server whispered. He also mentioned that some of his financial reports were adjusted to make everything look legitimate. Colton's jaw tightened as he processed the information. He nodded his thanks and slipped the server a generous tip. Keep this between us. Back at his apartment, Colton dove into action. He used his connections to dig deeper into Dylan's dealings. What he found confirmed his worst fears. Dylan was manipulating city grants meant for community projects, using falsified financial records to secure funding. The Arts Center was just a pawn in his scheme, a facade to gain public support for a high-end real estate development that would displace local families. Colton's fingers hovered over his phone as he debated his next move. This wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a calculated assault on everything Maya stood for. He couldn't let it go unchecked. Summoning his resolve, he dialed the number of Lauren Hayes, an investigative journalist known for exposing corporate corruption. Lauren, it's Colton Street. James, he said, his voice steady but urgent. I have a story you need to hear. Lauren's voice was sharp and professional. What's the story? Colton laid out the details, sharing the documents and evidence he'd gathered. Dylan Carr is using community grants to fund a luxury development under the guise of philanthropy. He's targeting an arts center run by Maya Collins, a project that's meant to help underprivileged kids. He plans to evict her the moment he gets what he wants. Lauren let out a low whistle. This could be huge. You're sure about the evidence? Every piece checks out, Colton replied. I'll send it over tonight. There was a pause on the line before Lauren spoke again. This story could ruin Dylan Carr. Are you ready for the fallout? Colton's gaze fell on a photo of Maya and the children at the Arts Center, their faces bright with hope. His chest tightened, but his expression remained resolute. Do it. Expose him. The news broke on a crisp Thursday morning. Dylan Carr's grinning face, so familiar to many in Seattle's elite circles, now flashed across every major local news outlet with headlines that read, "Business mogul exposed for exploiting community projects for personal gain." The expose was damning. Emails, contracts, and first-hand accounts detailed Dylan's manipulation of city grants, his plans to gentrify underprivileged neighborhoods, and his blatant disregard for the very people his projects were supposed to benefit. His grandiose plans to co-opt Maya's art center were laid bare for the world to see. Maya sat in the quiet of her apartment, her phone buzzing incessantly with calls and texts. Parents from the community, her best friend Lila, even a few of the kids from her classes, all wanted to know how she felt about Dylan's downfall. But Maya wasn't sure what to think. Relief warred with confusion. She had no idea who had leaked the information, but deep down she suspected the truth. At the arts center that evening, Maya arrived to find the children bustling with excitement. They were painting colorful banners and laughing as they told her about the cool guy who had been helping them with their art projects. Maya smiled faintly, her heart heavy with unanswered questions. She stepped into the main room and froze. There, crouched beside a small girl carefully blending colors on her canvas, was Colton. He looked up, their eyes meeting across the room. For a moment, everything else fell away. The noise, the chatter, the laughter. Maya's breath hitched as a mix of emotions surged within her. Anger, sadness, curiosity, and a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. "Cody," Maya said, her voice soft but carrying a firmness that made him freeze. Colton stood, brushing his hands on his jeans as if trying to ground himself. "Maya," he replied, his voice steady, but the vulnerability beneath it was unmistakable. The children, sensing the tension in the air, exchanged quick glances before scattering to give them space. The room seemed to quiet, the hum of activity fading, as Colton took a cautious step toward her. "I know," he began, his voice heavy with regret. "I'm probably the last person you want to see right now, but—" "What are you doing here?" Maya interrupted, her arms crossing tightly over her chest, a shield against the storm of emotions that stirred inside her. Colton hesitated, his gaze locked on hers. There was no escape, no more pretending. "I've been volunteering," he said finally, his voice raw. "I wanted to help, to do something good, to be a part of this." "Why?" she asked, her voice rising slightly, frustration spilling over. "Why do you care so much now?" He took a deep, unsteady breath, his hands fidgeting at his sides before falling still. "Because—" he paused, his voice trembling with the weight of his words. "Because I believe in you, Maya, in what you're building here. And because—" his voice cracked slightly, his eyes shining with emotion. "Because I care about you, more than I've ever cared about anyone." For a fleeting moment, Maya's expression softened. His words reached a part of her that still wanted to believe in him. But then the memory of his betrayal came rushing back, and her walls shot up again. "You lied to me, Colton," she said, her voice breaking but resolute. "You made me believe in something that wasn't real. You pretended to be someone you're not. How am I supposed to trust you again?" Colton flinched, the sting of her words cutting deep. He took a small step closer, his voice quieter now, but no less intense. "You're right. I lied. I was a coward, hiding behind a version of myself that I thought you'd accept. And I'll never forgive myself for that, because it cost me you." Maya's eyes glistened with unshed tears, her heart warring between the anger that still burned and the faint flicker of hope his words reignited. "But everything I feel for you," Colton continued, his voice steadying as he found the courage to speak his truth. "That's real. It always has been. And if it takes the rest of my life to prove that to you, I will. Because you're worth it, Maya. You and everything you stand for." Her breath caught, a single tear slipping down her cheek as she quickly wiped it away. The weight of his words hung between them, thick and palpable. For the first time, she saw the depth of his remorse, the rawness of his love, and it shook her resolve. She inhaled sharply, trying to steady herself. "Colton, I don't know if I can just forget what happened." "I'm not asking you to forget," he said, his voice breaking again. "I'm asking you to give me a chance to make it right, to show you that I can be the man who deserves you." The silence that followed was deafening. Maya's gaze lingered on him, searching his face for any hint of deceit. But all she found was sincerity, and a vulnerability that made her heart ache. "I need time," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "Time to figure out if I can trust you again." Colton nodded, his shoulders sagging slightly with relief. "Take all the time you need," I'm not going anywhere. She gave him a faint nod, her lips pressing into a thin line as she turned to leave. But just before stepping away, she glanced back at him, her voice barely above a whisper. I hope you mean that. Colton watched her go, his chest tightening as the door closed behind her. He felt the weight of her words, the fragility of the moment. But for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope, a sliver of light breaking through the storm, and he knew he would hold on to it with everything he had. Maya looked away, her mind racing. She wanted to believe him, but the betrayal still stung. Did you have anything to do with Dylan's exposé? She asked, her tone cautious. Colton hesitated, then nodded. Yes. I gave the journalist the documents, but only because I knew Dylan would ruin everything you've worked for. I didn't want to go behind your back, but I couldn't let him take this away from you. Maya studied him, her emotions a storm she couldn't quite contain. Finally, she let out a long breath. You could have told me. I could have helped. I know, Colton said, his voice filled with regret. I was scared you'd never give me the chance to make things right. Silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken words. But as Maya looked at him, at the raw sincerity in his eyes, she saw a man who wasn't trying to manipulate her, but someone who had made mistakes and was desperately trying to fix them. Let's finish this conversation later, Maya said finally, her voice softer. The kids are waiting. Colton nodded, relief flickering across his face. Whatever you need. Over the next few weeks, Colton threw himself into his volunteer work at the Arts Center. He painted murals with the children, helped organize supplies, and even stayed late to clean up after classes. Slowly, the parents and staff began to warm to him, their initial skepticism giving way to admiration for his dedication. Maya watched from a distance, her feelings shifting like the seasons. She couldn't deny that Colton was making a difference. The kids adored him, the community respected him, and even Dylan, her younger brother, seemed to be bonding with him. One evening, as Maya tidied up the art room, she noticed Colton sitting with a particularly shy boy, showing him how to mix paints. The boy, who rarely spoke to anyone, was smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile. The sight warmed something in Maya's chest, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. Later that night, as the center emptied out, Maya approached Colton. He was stacking chairs, his shirt streaked with paint and his hair slightly disheveled. Colton, she said, her voice soft. He turned, his expression guarded but hopeful. Yeah? I've been watching you, she admitted, and I see how much you care. Not just about me, but about the kids, the community. It means a lot. Colton set the chair down, his full attention on her. Maya, I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. I just want to be part of your world, on your terms. She hesitated, her gaze searching his. It's not that simple. Trust takes time. I know, he said, stepping closer, and I'm willing to wait, as long as it takes. For a moment, the weight of everything, the lies, the betrayal, the hope hung between them. Then slowly, Maya nodded. Okay. Colton's breath hitched, but he didn't push further. He knew this wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. The brisk Seattle air carried a hint of rain as Colton stood on the rooftop of a downtown event venue, surveying the transformation that had taken weeks of planning. Beneath the string lights casting a warm glow over the space, artists prepared their works, children's paintings were displayed proudly, and long tables adorned with fresh flowers waited for the evening's guests. The fundraiser for Maya's Art Center had to be perfect. It wasn't just about raising money. It was about showing Maya that her dream was worth fighting for, and that Colton was all in. He had mobilized every connection he had, pulling in favors and using his resources quietly to keep the focus on her and the center. Are you sure about this? Ethan's voice broke through Colton's thoughts as he joined him on the rooftop. His college friend had been instrumental in helping coordinate the event. Colton turned, his expression resolute. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. This is for her. Ethan smirked. It's a bold move, man. But if anyone can pull it off, it's you. As the evening unfolded, guests arrived in droves. Local philanthropists, community leaders, and even a few city officials. The space buzzed with excitement as attendees admired the artwork created by the children at the center. Parents beamed as they pointed out their kids' contributions, and the atmosphere carried an air of hope. Maya arrived late, wearing a simple but elegant dress that reflected her understated beauty. She was clearly overwhelmed as she stepped into the venue, her eyes widening at the sight of the crowd and the beautifully curated displays. Lila was the first to greet her, pulling her into a tight hug. "Maya, this is incredible. Cole, uh, Cody really outdid himself." "Cody?" Maya echoed, her brows furrowing. She scanned the crowd, her gaze landing on him near the stage. He was speaking with a group of guests, his posture relaxed but his expression focused. When he noticed her, their eyes locked, and he excused himself, walking toward her. "Maya," he said, his voice soft as he approached. "You made it." She crossed her arms, her expression wary but curious. "What is all this?" "It's for you," Colton said simply. "For the Arts Center. For the kids." Maya's gaze swept over the room again, taking in the thoughtful details. "You did all this?" "With a little help," he admitted, smiling faintly. "But it's your vision, Maya. I just wanted to give you a platform to show the world what you've built." Before she could respond, a soft chime signaled the start of the program. Colton touched her arm gently. "Come with me." The stage was simple but tastefully decorated, adorned with easels displaying the children's artwork. Colton took the microphone, his voice steady but filled with emotion as he addressed the crowd. "Good evening, everyone," he began. "Thank you for being here tonight to support something truly extraordinary. The Arts Center we're here to celebrate isn't just a building or a program. It's a beacon of hope for our community. It's a place where kids can dream, create, and believe in something bigger than themselves." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found Maya. "And none of this would be possible without Maya Collins. Her passion, her determination, and her belief in the power of art have inspired so many, including me." The audience applauded, and Maya's cheeks flushed as she looked down, overwhelmed. Colton took a deep breath, the next words weighing heavily on him. "I also have a confession to make. For those of you who don't know, my name isn't Cody, it's Colton Street." James' murmur rippled through the crowd, but Colton held steady, his gaze never leaving Maya. "I've spent most of my life surrounded by privilege, success, and wealth. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what really matters. When I met Maya, I was pretending to be someone else, someone simpler, someone more real, because I wanted to understand what it felt like to be seen for who I truly am, not for what I have." He stepped closer to the edge of the stage, his voice softening. "What I found was more than I could have ever imagined. Maya, you've shown me the kind of strength and grace I didn't think was possible. You've made me want to be better, to do better, and for that, I will always be grateful." Tears shimmered in Maya's eyes as she looked up at him, her walls beginning to crack under the weight of his honesty. "I know I've made mistakes," Colton continued, his voice filled with raw sincerity, "but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. I believe in you, in your dream, and in the future you're building, for the kids, for this community, and for yourself." The crowd erupted in applause as Colton stepped back, signaling the start of the fundraiser's main event. Maya stood frozen for a moment, her emotions swirling, before she was gently nudged by Lila. "Go," her friend whispered, smiling. "Talk to him." Maya found Colton near one of the art displays, his shoulders tense as he watched the guests mingle. She approached quietly, her voice soft but steady. "Colton." He turned, his eyes searching hers. "Maya, I meant every word." "I know," she said, her gaze unwavering. "And I believe you." Relief washed over his face, but he didn't move, waiting for her to say more. "You hurt me," she admitted, "and it's going to take time to rebuild that trust. But tonight, you reminded me why I cared about you in the first place." Colton stepped closer, his voice low. "Maya, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you can trust me." She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "Then you'd better get started." Without hesitation, Colton reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. The warmth of his touch was steady, reassuring. The evening ended with a record-breaking amount of donations, enough to secure the Arts Center's future for years to come. As the crowd dispersed, Colton and Maya stood side by side, watching the children run around the now empty venue. "You did it," Maya said, glancing at him. "No," Colton replied, his voice soft. "We did it." For the first time in what felt like forever, Maya let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, things were finally falling into place. Months had passed since the fundraiser, and the Arts Center had blossomed into the vibrant community hub Maya had always dreamed of. The walls were adorned with murals painted by the children, bursts of color that reflected their boundless creativity. Parents volunteered their time to help run programs, and the once shaky finances were now stable, thanks to the overwhelming support from the fundraiser. Colton stood at the edge of the center's garden, watching as Dylan, Maya's younger brother, pushed a wheelchair-bound child across the courtyard. The laughter of the children filled the air, blending with the soft rustling of leaves. He felt a hand on his arm and turned to see Maya smiling at him, her expression softer than he had ever seen it. She looked radiant, dressed simply, but glowing with contentment. "They're happy," she said, gesturing toward the kids. "They are," Colton agreed, his voice warm. "Because of you." Maya shook her head. "Because of us." The garden had become a sanctuary for the center, a space where the community could gather, and where Maya's vision for art and connection truly came alive. Today it was even more vibrant than usual, decorated with strings of lights and flower arrangements for a special celebration. The children had been hard at work creating a new mural, one that represented everything the center stood for: love, unity, and hope. Maya hadn't yet seen the finished piece, and the kids were excited to reveal it during the evening's event. As the sun began to set, guests arrived, filling the garden with chatter and laughter. Parents mingled, children played, and Maya moved through the crowd, thanking everyone who had helped make the center a success. Colton watched her from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. When the time came, Maya was led to the center of the garden, where the mural was covered with a large sheet. The children stood in front of it, grinning from ear to ear. "Ready, Miss Maya?" one of them asked. She nodded, her eyes bright with anticipation. "I'm ready." With a flourish, the sheet was pulled away, revealing the mural. Maya gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The painting depicted a scene of the garden itself, but at its heart were three figures: Maya, Colton, and Dylan, standing together, surrounded by the children. The detail was breathtaking, and the love behind it was unmistakable. Tears filled Maya's eyes as she turned to the kids. "It's beautiful. Thank you." "It's our way of saying thank you," one of the older children said, "for everything you've done for us." "There's something I need to say," Colton began, his voice steady but rich with emotion, though his hand trembled slightly as he reached for hers. "Maya, when I met you, I was a man trying to escape from myself, trying to figure out what it meant to be real. And then you came into my life." Maya's eyes softened, but confusion flickered across her face as he continued, his words growing heavier with meaning. "You changed everything, Maya. Before you, I thought success was measured by power, by wealth, by how many people knew your name. But you showed me that the most valuable thing in life is connection. Real, raw, human connection. The way you fight for what you believe in, the way you give all of yourself to the people you love. It's beautiful. You're beautiful." Her breath hitched, her lips parting, as if to respond. But Colton wasn't done. He dropped his gaze briefly, gathering his courage before looking deeply into her eyes. "You taught me what it means to love, not just to feel it, but to show it, to fight for it. You taught me that the greatest privilege in life isn't success or status, it's being worthy of someone's trust. And Maya, I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm worthy of yours." Maya's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes glistening with tears, but Colton wasn't finished. He reached into his pocket, his movements deliberate but shaking slightly, and pulled out a small velvet box. Dropping to one knee, he looked up at her with a mixture of vulnerability and hope that made the crowd instinctively quiet. "Maya Collins," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he opened the box to reveal a ring. It wasn't overly flashy, but elegant and timeless, a reflection of her. "You are my heart, my future, my reason to be better every day. Will you marry me?" Will you let me stand beside you through every dream, every challenge, and every moment in between? Tears spilled freely down Maya's cheeks, her hands trembling as she reached for his. Her voice came out in a whisper, raw and full of feeling. Colton, yes, yes, I will. The crowd erupted into cheers, their applause echoing through the garden. The children jumped up and down with excitement, their joy contagious. Dylan wheeled forward, his grin so wide it was impossible not to share in his happiness. Lila wiped tears from her eyes while snapping photos, murmuring to herself, "This is perfect." Colton's hands were steady now as he slid the ring onto Maya's finger, his gaze never leaving hers. As he stood, he pulled her gently into his arms, their lips meeting in a kiss that was as much a promise as it was an expression of love. The world seemed to fall away, the cheers and laughter fading into the background. In that moment, it was just the two of them. Two people who had fought through lies, betrayal, and uncertainty to find something real. When they pulled apart, Colton pressed his forehead to hers, his voice low and filled with awe. "Thank you, Maya, for saying yes, for giving me a chance. I promise, I'll never let you down." Maya smiled through her tears, her voice trembling but resolute. "You already haven't." As they stood together, surrounded by the people and the dream they had both worked so hard to protect, the moment was nothing short of magic, a new beginning for a love that had been tested and proven unbreakable. In the months that followed, Maya and Colton worked together to expand the Arts Center's reach, launching new programs and securing additional funding through partnerships Colton helped establish. But Colton had also learned to step back, letting Maya's vision take center stage. One evening, as they walked through the center's halls, they paused in front of the mural. The children had added one final touch, a banner that read, "Dreams made real together." Maya rested her head on Colton's shoulder, her voice soft. "I never thought I'd have all this." "You made it happen," Colton replied, wrapping an arm around her. "I just got lucky enough to be part of it." She smiled up at him. "And I'm lucky you stayed." As the scene faded into the hum of the community center, laughter and warmth filling the air, the camera lingered on the mural, capturing the essence of their journey. Love, redemption, and a future built on hope. And so Colton and Maya's journey teaches us that love isn't about perfection. It's about honesty, growth, and the courage to fight for what truly matters. In the end, their story reminds us that it's never too late to rebuild trust, to take risks, and to choose hope, even when the odds seem stacked against us. But what do you think? If you were in Maya's shoes, could you forgive Colton for his deception? Or if you were Colton, would you have had the courage to fight for a second chance? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective makes these discussions even richer. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because there are so many more captivating tales like this one coming your way. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.